The words from my stepmother's phone call sliced through me like shards of ice, each syllable laced with venom. You think you deserve that money? That trust fund belongs to Tiffany now. She's better than you'll ever be. I gripped the edge of the hotel room desk in Minneapolis, my knuckles whitening as I fought to steady my racing heart. Janet's voice, smug and dripping with satisfaction, echoed in my ears, delivering the crushing news that she'd emptied the trust fund my mother had left me. The audacity of her claim sent a surge of fury through me, but I refused to let it show. My name is Gabriella Mitchell, and at 28, I believed I'd finally broken free from the suffocating toxicity of my family's dynamics. As a pharmaceutical sales representative, my career kept me on the move, crisscrossing the country most weeks. That Tuesday in Minneapolis should have been routine, preparing slides for a critical client meeting the next day. Instead, I found myself listening to Janet gloat about stealing my inheritance, her words a calculated attempt to unravel me. "Thanks for letting me know," I replied, my voice steady, betraying none of the rage simmering beneath the surface. I could almost picture Janet's smug expression faltering, her anticipation of tears, pleading, or an outburst crumbling in the face of my calm resolve. She'd expected me to break, but I wasn't the vulnerable teenager she once knew. "That's all you have to say?" Janet pressed, her tone sharp with disappointment. "Tiffany needs that money for her wedding and her new house. You'd just squander it on your meaningless sales career." I closed my eyes, picturing my mother, who'd passed away when I was 16. She'd built a thriving pharmaceutical consulting business from nothing, pouring her heart into securing my future. The trust fund wasn't just money, it was her legacy, a safeguard for my dreams, a testament to her resilience. Janet, who married my father just 2 years after Mom's death, had coveted that money from the start, her greed thinly veiled behind a facade of family unity. "Is there anything else?" I asked, keeping my voice level, refusing to give her the reaction she craved. The silence on the other end was deafening, a rare moment of uncertainty from a woman who thrived on control. What Janet didn't know was that 6 months earlier, I'd had a pivotal conversation with Mr. Harrison, my mother's trusted lawyer. He'd warned me about suspicious inquiries Janet had made regarding the trust fund. Together, we'd fortified it with legal protections, ironclad safeguards that made unauthorized access not only impossible, but prosecutable. "You've always been such a disappointment," Janet spat, her final attempt to provoke me. "Your stepsister deserves this more than you ever will." I ended the call, my gaze drifting to the Minneapolis skyline beyond my hotel window. The city's lights twinkled against the dusk, a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside me. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from the certainty that Janet had finally overplayed her hand. Living with Janet after my mother's death from cancer had been like navigating a minefield. I was 16, grieving, and vulnerable when my father, desperate to rebuild our fractured family, married her. She brought along her daughter, Tiffany, then 13, and the tension in our household became palpable. Mom had poured her life into her business, working late nights to ensure my future was secure. The trust fund was her way of protecting me, even from beyond the grave. To Janet, however, it was an injustice, a privilege I held over Tiffany, her golden child. "Your mom wouldn't want you to be so selfish," Janet would say, her voice saccharine as she tried to guilt me into sharing the inheritance. "We're all family now." But we were never family, not in the way that mattered. While my father buried himself in work to escape his grief, Janet systematically marginalized me. Tiffany's every minor achievement, a school play, a passing grade, was celebrated with lavish praise and extravagant rewards. Meanwhile, my academic scholarships and acceptance into a top-tier business school went largely unnoticed, overshadowed by Janet's carefully curated narrative. She ensured my father saw only what she wanted, Tiffany as the deserving daughter, and me as the ungrateful outsider. The turning point came at my college graduation. I'd graduated at the top of my class, secured a prestigious job in pharmaceutical sales, and balanced it all while working part-time to support myself. Yet my father couldn't attend because Tiffany had a minor cold. She needs her father right now, Janet had insisted, her tone final. That moment crystallized the truth. Nothing would change unless I took control. The next day, I moved out, determined to build a life on my own terms. The trust fund remained untouched, not out of necessity, but because accessing it meant wading through Janet's interference. Her snide remarks followed me during every visit home, painting me as privileged while casting Tiffany as the struggling underdog. 6 months ago, when Mr. Harrison called to warn me about Janet's inquiries, the pieces fell into place. She'd been playing a long game, biding her time until she could strike. But I was no longer the grieving 16-year-old she could manipulate. I was my mother's daughter, armed with her strength and foresight. The trust fund wasn't just financial security. It was a symbol of everything my mother had worked for, a chance for me to take risks, to build something meaningful, just as she had. Sitting in my hotel room that evening, I pulled out the small, worn photo of my mother I always carried. Her smile was radiant, her eyes brimming with confidence, the kind of woman I'd always aspired to be. The trust fund was her gift, a safety net for my dreams. I dialed Mr. Harrison's number, my fingers steady despite the anger coursing through me. He answered on the second ring, his voice warm and reassuring, a lifeline in the chaos. Janet finally made her move, I said, cutting to the chase. She claims she's transferred everything to Tiffany. I was expecting this, Mr. Harrison replied calmly. I got an alert about attempted access to the account this morning. Don't worry, Gabriella. The security measures we put in place worked perfectly. Every attempt was logged and documented. I exhaled, relief washing over me. So nothing's been transferred? I asked. Not a penny, he confirmed. But we've got her on attempted fraud. The documentation is airtight. Would you like me to proceed with the next steps? I thought of the years of manipulation, the snide comments, the calculated efforts to erode my relationship with my father. Janet had been so confident in her scheme, so certain of her control, that she hadn't anticipated I'd be 2 steps ahead. Yes, I said firmly, my voice unwavering. It's time to end this. Send the evidence to the family lawyer and copy my father on everything. I want him to see exactly what his wife tried to do. As I hung up, I looked out at the Minneapolis skyline once more, the city's lights a quiet promise of justice. Janet had underestimated me, but I was ready. My mother's legacy was mine to protect, and I would fight for it with everything I had. Do consider it, Mr. Harrison said, his voice steady and reassuring over the phone. And Gabriella, your mother would be so proud. She always said you were smarter than anyone gave you credit for. His words settled over me like a warm blanket, grounding me in the chaos of the moment. I hung up, my resolve solidified, and opened my laptop with purpose. My fingers moved swiftly across the keyboard as I booked an earlier flight home to Boston. The client meeting in Minneapolis would have to wait. There was a family matter demanding my attention, and this time, I would be the one in control. The next morning, I landed in Boston, the autumn air sharp and crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and distant wood smoke. My father's house, the one I'd grown up in, stood unchanged, its red brick facade and white shutters a snapshot of my childhood. Yet something felt different as I approached, my suitcase rolling softly behind me. Perhaps it was me, stronger, more certain, no longer the grieving girl who'd once tiptoed through these halls. I'd called ahead to let my dad know I was coming, but I hadn't mentioned Janet's phone call. Some truths were too heavy for a phone conversation. They needed to be faced head-on. Inside, I found them in the living room. My father, Janet, and Tiffany, frozen in a tableau of domestic normalcy that shattered the moment I stepped through the door. Janet's smug smile, so confident during our phone call, wavered, replaced by a flicker of confusion at my calm, composed demeanor. Gabriella, my dad began, his brow furrowing with concern as he rose from his armchair. I didn't expect you until later. Is everything okay? Actually, Dad, we need to talk, I said, my voice steady as I pulled out my phone and opened the file Mr. Harrison had emailed me the previous day. Janet called to tell me she'd emptied my trust fund, and given everything to Tiffany. I thought you should see exactly what happened. Janet's face drained of color, her carefully curated mask slipping as I handed my father the folder. She's lying, Janet snapped, her voice shrill. But I held up a hand, my tone as sharp as steel. Every attempt you made to access the account was documented. Every call, every forged signature, every manipulation. It's all here. My father's hands trembled as he opened the folder, his eyes scanning the pages. With each document, his expression darkened, the weight of Janet's betrayal sinking in. "Janet, what did you do?" he whispered, his voice barely audible, laced with disbelief. "She's lying." Tiffany jumped in, her face flushed with indignation. "She's always been jealous of me." I met her gaze, unflinching, and produced another document, the complete trust fund statement. "The money's still there, safe and untouched," I said. "Janet's attempts to transfer it failed because I was warned about her plans months ago. I took precautions." "Precautions?" Janet spat, her composure unraveling. "You set me up." I shook my head, my voice calm but unyielding.
"No, Janet."
I protected what was mine just like my mom taught me to do. The silence that followed was suffocating, the air thick with tension as my father read through the evidence. Manipulative emails Janet had sent to the bank, forged signatures bearing his name, and a trail of calculated moves to siphon my inheritance. It was all laid bare in stark black and white. "I did this for our family," Janet protested, her voice wavering as she clung to her crumbling narrative. "Tiffany needed—" "Stop," my father interrupted, his voice cracking with a mix of anger and heartbreak. "Just stop, Janet. These documents, you tried to forge my signature. You lied to the bank. He trailed off, looking up at me, his eyes glistening with a pain I hadn't seen since my mother's death. "Gabriella, I had no idea." "Of course you didn't," I said softly, my heart aching for him. Janet made sure of that. Mr. Harrison had meticulously organized the evidence, presenting a chronological record of Janet's attempts to undermine my relationship with my father while plotting to seize the trust fund. The latest documents detailed her failed transfer attempt, followed by her furious calls to the bank when her plan unraveled. "This is ridiculous," Tiffany shouted, leaping to her feet, her face red with defiance. "Mom was just trying to make things fair. Gabs always had everything handed to her." I turned to my stepsister, a mix of pity and frustration swirling within me. "Handed to me?" I said, my voice steady. "I worked through college, built my career from nothing, and never touched that trust fund. Mom left it to me because she wanted me to have choices just like she did. But Janet couldn't stand that, could she?" Janet's composure finally shattered. "You ungrateful little," she began, but I cut her off, my voice cold and final. "I've already filed charges. The bank has all the evidence of attempted fraud. Mr. Harrison is handling everything." I turned to my father, softening my tone. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way, but you needed to know the truth." The weight of 12 years of manipulation hung heavy in the room. My father looked at Janet, his gaze hard, as if seeing her for the first time. "Janet," he said, his voice trembling with barely contained fury, "I want you out of this house. Tonight." "What?" Janet's voice rose to a shrill pitch, her eyes wide with disbelief. "You can't be serious. After everything I've done for this family?" "Done for this family?" my father countered, his tone quiet but resolute. "You tried to steal from my daughter. You forged my signature. You've been lying to me for years." Tiffany began to cry, but these weren't her usual crocodile tears. There was a rawness to her sobs, a dawning realization of her mother's actions. Perhaps, for the first time, she understood the gravity of what Janet had attempted. "The police will want to talk to you," I said to Janet, my voice calm but firm. "Mr. Harrison has already filed the reports. The bank's fraud department is involved now." Janet's eyes narrowed, her voice dripping with venom. "You planned this. You knew I'd try to access the trust fund." I shook my head. "No, Janet. You planned this. I just made sure I was ready when you did." I turned to my father, my heart heavy but resolute. There's more. Mr. Harrison found evidence that she's been skimming money from your accounts, too small amounts, building up over years. My father sank back into his chair, his face etched with devastation. I felt a pang of guilt for causing him pain, but the truth had been buried long enough. Get out, he repeated to Janet, his voice barely above a whisper. Both of you. I'll have my lawyer contact you about the divorce. As Janet and Tiffany gathered their belongings, their accusations and tears filling the room with chaos, I stood quietly by the window, the same window where I used to watch for my mother's car pulling into the driveway after a long day at work. I could almost hear her voice, steady and wise. Always be prepared, sweetheart, and never let anyone take what's rightfully yours. In the weeks that followed, my father and I had long overdue conversations. One evening, we sat in the kitchen, the same space where my mother used to help me with my homework, her laughter filling the air. The weight of years hung between us as we sipped coffee, the silence broken by his quiet admission. I failed you, he said, staring into his mug, his voice thick with regret. After your mom died, I was so focused on not being alone that I didn't see what was happening right in front of me. We both made mistakes, I admitted, my voice soft. I could have told you sooner about Janet's behavior, but I wanted proof. I needed you to see it for yourself. The legal proceedings moved swiftly. Janet faced charges of attempted fraud and financial exploitation, her claims of acting for the family's sake crumbling under the weight of overwhelming evidence. The bank's documentation painted a damning picture of her calculated attempts to access my trust fund over years. Tiffany reached out via email, her words tentative and raw. I'm sorry, she wrote. I always thought you had everything handed to you. Mom made it seem like you were the privileged one, but now I see she was just jealous of what your mom built for you. I wasn't sure if I believed her claim of ignorance, but I understood she was grappling with her own revelations about her mother's true nature. I chose not to respond, focusing instead on the future. With Mr. Harrison's guidance, I used the trust fund to launch my own business consulting firm, a dream I'd long harbored but had been too cautious to pursue. The money my mother left me became the seed for something new, just as she'd intended. During one of our meetings, Mr. Harrison smiled warmly. Your mother would be proud, he said. She always said you had her business sense and your father's heart. She knew you'd do great things. As I stood in my new office, the walls still bare but brimming with possibility, I felt my mother's presence. The trust fund wasn't just money. It was her belief in me, her legacy of resilience. I'd protected it, just as she'd taught me, and now I was ready to build something of my own, carrying her strength forward into a future she'd always dreamed I'd have. My father began visiting my office for lunch every Wednesday, a ritual that became a cornerstone of our renewed bond. The small cafe across from my consulting firm in downtown Boston buzzed with the hum of conversation, but our table felt like a quiet sanctuary. Sometimes, we shared memories of my mother, stories Janet had once made too painful to revisit. We'd laugh over her quirky habit of annotating business books in the margins or recall her fierce determination during late-night strategy sessions. Other times, we talked about the future, his eyes regaining the spark I remembered from before Mom's illness. You know what your mom used to say about you? He asked one crisp autumn afternoon, a smile tugging at his lips. She said you were like a diamond, pressure only made you stronger. Life settled into a new rhythm, one defined by purpose and healing. My consulting firm, built with a trust fund my mother left me, grew steadily, its reputation spreading among pharmaceutical companies for our direct approach and deep industry knowledge. I hired a small but dedicated team, including Sarah, a brilliant analyst whose drive and determination reminded me of my mother's relentless spirit. Sarah's sharp insights and unyielding work ethic mirrored the qualities Mom had poured into her own business, and mentoring her felt like honoring that legacy in a tangible way. Janet's trial concluded with a plea deal, sparing her jail time but imposing significant restitution and a permanent ban from working in any financial capacity. The last I heard, she'd relocated to Arizona to live with her sister, fading into the periphery of my life. Tiffany stayed in Boston, working as a teacher's assistant. Our contact was minimal, limited to occasional emails, brief, polite exchanges that carried the weight of our fractured history. I didn't hold her fully responsible for her mother's actions, but the distance between us felt necessary, a quiet boundary to protect my peace. My father threw himself into rebuilding our relationship with a sincerity that warmed the corners of my heart. He shared stories about my mother I'd never heard, how they'd met at a bustling business conference, their early struggles to launch her company, the late nights spent dreaming of a future where their daughter could thrive. Each story was a thread, weaving together the pieces of a family we'd nearly lost to Janet's manipulations. One evening, as we sorted through old boxes in the attic of the house I grew up in, we stumbled upon my mother's business journal, its leather cover worn but intact. Tucked inside was a letter addressed to me, dated just weeks before her passing. My dearest Gabriella, it began in her elegant, looping handwriting. I'm leaving you more than money. I'm leaving you the freedom to choose your path. Don't let anyone dim your light or tell you what you deserve. You're stronger than you know, smarter than they give you credit for, and capable of anything you set your mind to. Trust yourself. I do. Love, Mom. Tears blurred my vision as I read her words, a beacon of encouragement that felt as alive as the day she'd written them. I framed the letter and hung it in my office, its presence a daily reminder of where I came from and the boundless possibilities of where I was going. My father retired from his corporate job and began volunteering at a grief counseling center, helping families navigate the kind of loss that had once fractured us. Occasionally, he'd consult for my firm, bringing decades of experience and a perspective that complemented my approach perfectly. His insights grounded our strategies, blending seasoned wisdom with my innovative vision, a partnership that felt like a quiet tribute to my mother's legacy. 5 years later, as I reflect on those turbulent events, I'm struck by how much has changed. My consulting firm has expanded to 3 cities, streamlining operations for pharmaceutical companies, just as my mother once did. The trust fund she left me didn't just secure my future, it became the foundation for helping others build theirs. My father fully retired last year, but still visits the office to mentor our younger employees, saying it keeps him connected to Mom's spirit. Our Wednesday lunches remain sacred, a time to make up for the years lost to Janet's deceit. The hardest lesson wasn't about money or betrayal, it was about standing up for myself. My mother knew I'd one day need to fight for what was mine, and she ensured I had the tools to do so. Her wisdom echoed in every decision I made, from safeguarding the trust fund to launching my business. Sometimes I visit the old house where I grew up. My father still lives there, but it's different now. The walls are repainted in soft, warm hues, the furniture rearranged to erase Janet's presence. In Mom's old office, now a cozy library, I found her collection of business books last week. Inside one, her handwritten notes outline plans to teach me to run her company someday, a dream cut short by her illness. Though I never got that chance with her, every choice I make in my business carries echoes of her guidance. Janet's attempt to steal my inheritance taught me a valuable truth. Sometimes, people reveal exactly who they are, and the best response is to be prepared. Those difficult years shaped me into someone my mother would be proud of, someone who doesn't just survive challenges, but grows stronger from them. On my desk at work sits my favorite photo, Mom and me in her office, laughing over a moment long forgotten. It's a reminder that while some try to tear you down, others, like my mother, build you up in ways that endure a lifetime. Each year, on the anniversary of my mother's passing, my father and I visit her grave, bringing fresh flowers from her beloved garden, a tradition we began after Janet's departure. This year, standing beneath the sprawling oak that shades her resting place, I shared the letter I'd found in her journal. My father read it silently, his hands trembling slightly as he held the worn paper, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "She was always thinking ahead," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "Even when she was fighting for her own life, she was fighting for yours, too." In that moment, I realized every step I'd taken, to protect her legacy, to stand firm against betrayal, to build something meaningful, was her final gift to me. "She'd be so proud of you," my father said, placing a hand on my shoulder, his voice steady despite the weight of the moment. And I couldn't be prouder to call you my daughter. We stood in quiet reflection, the autumn breeze carrying the scent of flowers and memories, knowing that while some wounds never fully heal, love and resilience can transform even the deepest scars into enduring strength. Please feel free to comment below if you liked this. Remember to like and subscribe for more.